Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to our discussion today on the future of fraud operations. We are joined at this event with our colleagues from ACAMS, and today we will walk you through what we hope to be a very interesting and insightful discussion on the future of fraud operations, emerging trends and threats, and also how you can future-proof your organization against these trends. From ACAMS, we have Joby Carpenter, who is a fraud SME, and I'm joined also by my forensics colleagues, Angelica and Leonard, and my own name is Una Barrett, and I will be your host for today. During the session, you'll hear from each of our colleagues, and we've got quite an ambitious agenda. I guess we will start with Joby's introduction to the fraud threat landscape. I will then cover the emerging challenges in fraud operations. Angelica will cover the strategic defense and anti-fraud proofing, and then Leonard will cover the importance of technology in the subject. Before we wrap up, we'll also leave you with some practical tips and takeaways so that you can take that forward into your own businesses. And I must also mention that throughout the session, there will be some interactive polling. I would really love you to participate because we really want you to be part of this discussion. So although we have a bit of an ambitious agenda, I think we can do it. So no pressure to my fellow speakers. But Joby, without any further delay, I will hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Una, for that introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. As Una mentioned, my name's Joby Carpenter. I'm a global subject matter expert in illicit finance, fraud, and emerging threats. And I'm going to start this presentation by moving on to the next slide and talking a little bit about the context for the current fraud threat that we're all very conscious of, and we're all, I think, aware that this is growing exponentially. I've heard it described as a tsunami, and the numbers around the current fraud threat are truly staggering. I think you've got to be conscious that the US government has publicly stated it loses up to $521 billion per year. That is just the US federal government. So obviously the scale here, the volume and the figures are just immense. In terms of the fraud threat against individuals and financial institutions, according to the European Banking Authority, credit transfers and card payments dominate in terms of value, and then manipulation of the payer, essentially social engineering, accounts for over half of all credit transfer fraud. Remote initiation is a key enabler here, whether through mobile apps or online channels, and fraud rates spike dramatically when the counterparty is outside of the European Economic Area. So beyond payments, money mules remain a critical link. We've known about them for many, many years, of course, with crossovers with money laundering, with over $58 billion in laundering activity linked to those muling networks. Europol have flagged investment fraud, business email compromise, romance scams, and digital skimming as some of their top fraud typologies. So what's the key takeaway here? And it can seem like it's a bit overwhelming, right? But I think that we've all got to be conscious that fraud is a systemic, cross-border and increasingly digital, and it requires us to think outside of the box in terms of detection and prevention strategies. So just moving into the next slide. Recently, ACAMS did a bit of work where we worked collaboratively with law enforcement, with regulators, financial institutions, ACAMS members, to consider how the fraud threat may develop over the period between 2026 to 2030. And I think the key takeaway here is that AI is going to fundamentally reshape fraud, both how it impacts in terms of the threat, but also how we respond to those developments. So there's some really worrying themes here. I'm afraid I'm going to be giving some bad news here. We're not talking simply about incremental change. AI is already enabling fraud at scale, and the ability to launch thousands of simultaneous attacks, overwhelming detection systems. So authentication is going to be increasingly under siege. Voice and facial replication will make biometric checks far less reliable. Social engineering is going to continue to evolve, and AI is going to create written messages, deepfakes, driving even more convincing scams. Fraudsters are also going to look to exploit synthetic identities and networks, and that's going to make network linkage and analysis harder, and they'll also use AI to generate authentic looking documents that can bypass KYC checks. So perhaps I think most concerning here is adaptive learning. Fraud tactics are going to self-optimize again and again and again after perhaps an initial failure, and that will make them harder to detect and block over time. So the message here, I think, is clear. The next wave of fraud is going to be faster, smarter, and more personalized, and we all need to adapt our defenses just as quickly as the criminals. Una, back to you.
Joby, that's quite some message to begin a Wednesday morning with. And listen, you've really raised some important topics here. I think the out-of-the-box thinking and the, I guess, reactive, maybe more proactive approach, we need to really think differently about all the enablers that are occurring and rapidly, as you rightly said. Before I jump into my session on the emerging challenges of fraud operations, I would also like to maybe just open the first poll. So on the screen, you will see the question: where are you directing your transformation efforts within fraud operations this year, or indeed the next financial year? So really, we'd love you to kind of drop in your answers according to what you see on your screen, and we'll come back to the results at the end of this section so that we can maybe open that up again and pick it apart a little. So moving along. When we talk about emerging challenges in fraud operations, we really see this duality issue between the volume of fraud and the complexity of fraud. As Joby rightly outlined, there's really like an unprecedented wave or a tsunami of fraud incidents, and it's coming at organizations irrespective of the industry. I think people traditionally associated fraudulent activities with financial institutions, payment service providers, etc., but that's no longer the case. It's really cross-industry. And I think it's worth maybe discussing a little bit about what is causing this. I mean, clearly, the rapid adoption of digital banking, instant payments, the desire to have truly frictionless payments in order to enhance your customer experience. And then, of course, everybody's favorite, AI and machine learning. This creates a really fertile ground for, fraudulent activities. But the issue is we need to get ahead of the fraudsters here. Of course, another factor to kind of consider is the deep fakes and the synthetic identities. We'll touch on this a little bit later, but the use of these methods and those hyper-personalized phishing attacks, you have to be super vigilant now. And in anybody's day-to-day work, whether you're working in procurement or in finance, or in payroll, you have like a million things to do every day, much less be some kind of, fraud investigator to try and stop these challenges. In many respects, the sophistication of fraud now really almost makes the traditional controls we know of, it kind of makes them a little bit redundant. So we really need to kind of revisit that landscape. In addition, VPN has become like a massive issue in terms of masking location and geography, because again, you can easily, direct your IP address to another location. And then also, of course, the use of deepfakes and voice activation. So anybody who has any element of a public profile can kind of be manipulated and can be used for authorization purposes. So there's a lot of different factors here that we need to kind of think about how those impact our clients' organizations and how we can help them get a step ahead of it. One other thing that came up during our research recently was that you can actually get off-the-shelf fraud kits. So you don't even have to be that intelligent anymore in order to, commit fraud. As long as you have some basic tech knowledge, it's kind of all out there. So moving forward, thinking about what that does to, most commercial organizations, everybody knows the importance of a client's trust, how hard-earned it is, and how easy it is to lose it. And so really, we see kind of the client experience and like public confidence at an all-time low because of the prevalence of fraud. And one of the things that we wanted to highlight here was that, the client's experience is influenced by the level of trust it has in an organization. And that could be your local bank, or it could be your marketplace platform, the many, many services that we use day in, day out. So in order to kind of retain that public level of trust, we really need to combat this and get ahead of the issue. In addition to the public confidence risk, there's also a legal risk. There are increasingly arduous and complicated regulations being imposed in a variety of jurisdictions, which puts a lot of the responsibility on the organization itself to pay out, when there is a fraudulent attack. And of course, that hits every company's bottom line. So really, it's kind of like a lose-lose situation. You will lose your client's trust. You will, have to pay out. And then also on top of that, it's a reputational risk. So nobody wants to be, I guess, the next, newspaper headline. And then also, if you think about fraud operations themselves, those of you who work in fraud operations will fully understand that the function itself is already something that is extremely, is under a large amount of stress day to day. There are so many kind of moving parts and things to monitor that it's very hard to take a step back and address some of what I call the black holes in fraud operations. That includes things like process inefficiencies, delayed and inconsistent decision making, also, of course, the daily firefighting. It often happens. I mean, I think we're about to go into, Black Friday. So it happens at this time of year. It will happen at Christmas time. It'll happen, in all the peak holiday periods. And it's really hard when you move from one to the other to actually have time to think about how your organization looks and what you can do differently. There's also the added drain of people doing repetitive tasks and then moving on to another organization. So again, you're losing the talent you invested in. So thinking about, I guess, how to then pivot to the solution here. For me, with everything we've just outlined, the key thing really is around people and technology. So we have been supporting clients for a number of years now in terms of anti-fraud practices. And for me, it's looking at your operating model and deciding, actually, what will I change? There's many different ways to really enhance and make your operating model more robust. It can be seasonal SWAT teams, so you can have that staff augmentation, people who are already fully trained on your processes, know exactly what to do in terms of dispositioning alerts or how to escalate or how to prepare SARS. You can have more longer-term staff augmentation, again, to deal with backlogs, remediation exercises. It's very hard for teams who may already be quite sizable to recruit people to deal with those backlogs. So having a trusted advisor to help you actually kind of deal with that on an ongoing basis, so you're not having to retrain new people every time, I think is super important. And of course, also, we're talking to a lot of our clients about fraud operations as a managed service. Of course, it's a very sensitive function, but we do see people more and more interested in outsourcing or nearshoring part of that function, because it's simply impossible to do in some higher cost territories. Then, of course, across the bottom, we have a hybrid model. So perhaps you want some element of all these pieces. Again, the main thing to do is have the trusted advisor or advisors in mind in order to select the right model for your organization. When it comes to technology, I'm not the expert here. Leonard will cover more of this in more detail, but there's just three things I wanted to highlight. I guess with regards to the use of technology, we said earlier, AI is so far ahead of us here, and the way people are using it, we really need to try and now reverse that dynamic, and we need to get ahead of it and use what we have. So when it comes to predictive models, most organizations actually have tons of data about their clients, and they know how their clients behave. So whether that's what they buy, where they buy it from, delivery addresses, etc., there is a wealth of data that sits within, your organization systems. And it's really about then getting the right people in to understand how you can move those predictive models forward and develop something that is more proactive rather than reactive. In addition to that, with the behavioral biometrics, the continuous user authentication, detecting what is anomalous behavior, again, there's lots of tooling out there that can really help that and help you predict and detect early on. And of course, hybrid workflows. This is essentially the combination of these 2 points. It's human and it's the machine. So combining, I suppose, the expertise of your fraud analyst, your fraud SME, and I guess ensuring that they're being used in a way that is most value adding for your organization. it's really important that, they know how to let the machines do their part of the work, and then your analysts can do their real-time analysis. I think my prediction for the future is that it will be very hard to hand all of this over to AI or machine learning models, but I could be proved wrong. But I think when it comes to agility and scalability, you have to have the combination of both. And of course, overlaying all this in terms of enhanced accuracy and efficiency, there has to be a human element to that as well. So before I go forward to the next section, I'd just like to check in on the polls to understand what kind of response rates we have. So just to remind everyone of the question, we asked, where are you directing transformation efforts with fraud operations this year? Thank you all for your responses. I see there is a big focus on enhanced training and upskilling, which is great to see, but also a very interesting number as well, incorporating AI and machine learning capability. I'm glad to see that the minority is not thinking about the transformation effort at all. I mean, that's good to hear. So thank you for that. That was really helpful. Angelica, I'll hand over to you.
Oh, thank you, Una. So now we know how we should change our approach to better mitigate fraud risks. So let's see how the new fraud landscape looks like. But before we'll move on, just a quick reminder about our survey. So in this section, we are very curious about your opinion about emerging fraud scenarios. So which emerging fraud scenario worries you and your team the most? I hope that you already see the poll. So just a couple seconds for you to answer the question. Hope you are ready. We are looking for your answers. And I believe that we can come back to the presentation. So fraud is evolving fast. Attackers are using advanced technologies to make sure that their schemes look and sound completely real. So on the slide, you can see 3 threats that are now the most common. So deepfake impersonation, AI-powered phishing and document fraud, and also automation-driven attack scaling. Let's now go one by one to see what's behind them. Let's start from my favorite one, actually, so deepfake impersonation. So the situation when voice and picture are used to imitate executives, trusted individuals, actually important person within the company, to commit fraud. In public sphere, you can see many examples of such schemes. A few moments ago, we were shocked with a very simple scam, the scam that based on a super simple, clever trick. So it was in 2015 when fraudsters impersonated French Minister of Defense just by using a silicone mask and a fake office room setup. So they managed to convince wealthy targets that they were being contacted directly by the minister, who requested financial help to pay for, obviously, confidential governmental operations. They believed and transferred around $90 million. So as I said, it was a simple trick. Now the fraudsters are using more sophisticated methods. So imagine that it is entirely possible to join a call, video call, Teams call with your CFO, with other senior executives from your team, where every single person on a call is a fake, is generated by AI. Sounds like science fiction? Actually, it's not. It's happening. It costed UK engineering company £20 million. So during the call with this fake superiors, employee was instructed to send money to designated bank accounts, which he did actually without asking any further questions. So £20 million, all gone. Also, Ferrari, as you can see here on the slide, faced similar attack. It was interesting because criminals use WhatsApp with a voice clone of CEO, even including his Italian accent. So they tried to steal sensitive financial information. What saved Ferrari was a perfect reaction of the employee, because he asked very basic question just to confirm the identity of CEO. It was the question about the book that CEO recommended to him earlier. So as you can see, even basic controls can still make a difference. What shocked me the most when I was looking into these headlines was that even cybersecurity companies are targeted by, by deepfake voicemails. So if they can be fooled, I believe that unfortunately everyone can. So the pattern here is very clear. So it's a combination of urgency, authority, and realism. So if your processes rely only on trust, unfortunately, you can also be a victim. So let's now quickly jump into next fraudulent technique. So I missed something with the slide, yeah? Sorry. I see that we've got some issue with the slide, so I will go without slide and explain you other fraudulent technique, which is phishing and document fraud. It isn't something new, but this time we are talking about phishing and document fraud that is powered by AI. So now emails can be flawless, can be personalized, can be very convincing. So based on existing tools, we can produce phishing, actually fraudsters can produce phishing emails that very well mimic style, tone, and even organizational context. On top of that, attackers are using LinkedIn accounts, are using companies' websites in order to make sure that their message will be personalized, will be linked to real events, or even they are using authentic signatures. So AI can generate fake invoices, fake contracts, and even synthetic identities that can pass, as Joby mentioned, that can pass basic KYC checks in a second. According to the survey that was performed in 2025, it was done by a global company specializing in delivery AML KYC platforms. So the results were that synthetic identity document fraud rose year by year by over 300% in US and Europe. So fraudsters can now launch the attacks that look legitimate, that sound authentic, and that can be scalable without huge effort. And actually, this brings us to the third threat. So automation that is used for scaling the attacks. I will come back to the first slide so we can still see all three threats. So fraudsters are no longer working manually. They are now using armies of bots to do the heavy lifting. So these bots can create thousands of fake accounts in a minute. They can collect credentials in a speed that no human could match. So they don't just attack one company. They hit hundreds simultaneously 24/7. Between April 24 and April 25, Microsoft claimed that they blocked 1.6 million attempts of bot signups per hour, which is a huge scale. So why it is important? Automation makes fraud much faster, easier. Scams that took weeks now can happen in seconds. So videos, voices, images cannot be trusted anymore. So the main message here is that we need better ways to protect ourselves. And actually, we are not helpless here. So there are effective strategies for building resilience, for preparing for an impact. So let's go through the main elements. Now you can see them on the slides just to quickly comment on the ways how organizations can defend against new frauds. I would start with the most important, so human factors. So basically, criminals are targeting people because we are easy entry point. That is why our training for our employees and raising awareness within the company should be our first line of defense. Fraudsters use voice cloning, use fake video calls, use urgent payment requests. These are now the scams that we are facing every day. So our training should make everyone aware of this trick. So our employees can spot the fraud and stop the fraud in action. It is so important that the training should be practical, no more theory. Yeah, it is worth checking what will be the reaction of your employee if he or she will receive the call from CFO urgently asking for a wire transfer. Also, it is important to stick to the process, so no exception. I can recommend you very good rules. So do not pay on the call. It should be, implemented as a hard rule in a company. Also, it is important to double check the requests using obviously separate, reliable method. I mentioned about people, but also we cannot forget about technology. So technology can now improve our chances against skilled and modern fraudsters. So good example, so you can hear it on the slide, as a layered verification. So think about your security like a doors with many locks. Don't rely just on one, yeah? Always confirm sensitive requests through more than one method, yeah? Just to make sure that they are legit. Also, AI can be our super supporter when it comes to fraud detection methods. So now AI is the best tool for spotting fraud. So it catches what human may miss. So it's like a tiny facial movements in a deepfake videos. AI can also flag strange behaviors, so odd spending or logins from unusual places. And the last one, not to forget, very basic. So source of true data. Rely on trusted data. Make decisions based on official documentation. So it's very simple. Whenever something seems off, check the real source. If someone claimed they are from the company, hang up and call from other official number. If you get a suspicious document, just reach out to the sender using verified contact details. These actions are much cheaper than dealing with fraud. And what is important, they can be used even in tough situations. I believe Leonard will tell us more about technology, but before we'll move on to this section, I would be very keen to see the results of our survey. Hope that you have chance to give your answer here. So just waiting a second to see the result. Oh, it's very interesting because we do not have let's say a winner, a big winner, because we see that many of you voted for hyper-personalized phishing, but also deepfake is presented here as a leader. So it's pretty much the same what we are observing on the market, and when we are discussing with the clients what issues they are facing at the moment, actually these two elements are now the most significant issue for them. But as I said, we are not helpless. We still can use technology to protect ourselves. And I believe that now it's the best moment to pass voice to Leonard, who can take us through the technology that is available on the market and that can help us to protect.
Yes, so we will be talking about shifting from reactive to proactive, the role of technology in fraud operations. And before we start, I would like to ask you a question. How would you characterize your current fraud operation model? After my presentation, we go through the polls like we did just before. So shifting from reactive to proactive approach to fraud detection process. So basically, today, we operate reactively. Fraud happens, we spot it, we investigate it, patch it up after loss, and success is measured by time of response and not prevention rate. The problem is that fraudsters always have a window of opportunity. It costs resources, time, money, people that we need to spend on fixing the incident. And we are always preparing for yesterday's attack. We're not predicting, we are only reacting. So for example, today KPIs is the reduction of time from days to hours as progress, but not reactiveness. So a bank discovers phishing scam only after the customer has reported stolen funds. By then the damage is done, the reputation is broken, and trust diminish. So how do we get there? Well, we use technology and we use a different approach. We try to implement processes and procedures, and we try to break the silos between different departments within the company to be able to do that. So what's the reactive trap? As I mentioned, basically, first the fraud happens, then we investigate, we identify the issue, and then we apply countermeasures. But basically what we are doing, we're defending each other from yesterday's attack. For example, after a data breach, the team works overtime to notify customer and reset password, but the breach already happened and the damage has been lost, and there is the cost of reputation. So benefits of predictive fraud prevention. So let's imagine that there is a threat that has been mitigated before it even happened. So proactive approach could be detect the suspicious pattern before they become real problems. We identify a compromised account before misuse, and we spot new fraud schemes early before widespread damage. So what are the benefits for everyone and the companies and clients? Well, we save money and resources. We save the face of the company. We reduce customer friction, and we build trust with the customer, which has long-term benefits. And of course, prevention is always cheaper than cleanup. Let me give you some examples. A credit company blocks a suspicious transaction in real time, then alerts the customer no loss has been occurred, and the customer builds trust with the company. An online retailer detects a bot attack on user account and forces a password reset before any accounts are taken over. The third example I can give you is a telecom operator identifies a SIM swap attempt by analyzing unusual request patterns, stopping fraud before it starts, which helps to mitigate the risk of identity theft. Tools driven for proactive fraud prevention. Well, artificial intelligence and deep learning, advanced biometrics, graph analytics and relationship mapping, cloud computing, and scalable infrastructure. But let me give you some more examples. For example, we can base our prevention on real-time data processing. So analyzing millions of transactions instantly, catch fraud as it happens. For example, a payment processor, as mentioned, has flagged and halted a suspicious transaction, which within seconds, preventing unauthorized transfers. Machine learning and predictive analytics. So we basically learn everything we can from many transactions and predict fraud techniques. So for example, an e-commerce platform machine learning model detects a new type of promo abuse before it spreads. Behavioral analytics, profile users, devices, accounts, spots abnormal activity, even new threats. For example, a bank notices a customer logging in from a new device and location, triggering extra verification. For example, it verifies if the device has logged in before, if the IP that the customer is using is an IP within a region he usually logs in. We can also use also the network effect intelligence. When one institution spots a threat or a new tactic, the knowledge is shared instantly within the market. It's a collective immunity. We also could use AI and deep learning. We analyze multiple data streams, transaction device fingerprints, location, social links, and spot coordinated attacks before losses. So for example, an AI system detects a coordinated attack on several accounts linked by the same device fingerprint. Then we can also use advanced biometrics and device intelligence. So beyond password, we can verify how you type, how you move your mouse, how hard you press on your screen. And it's a unique user device identification because those patterns are very difficult to replicate. So later, we can also talk about the graph analytics, where we map relationship between accounts, devices, locations, and flags related to accounts. So for example, a fraud ring exposed when graph analysis links multiple fake accounts to the same phone number. So basically, we can also discuss cloud computing, which is very important because this allows us for instant scaling up, analyze global transaction volume in real time. And so, for example, a fraud detection system handles Black Friday surge without delays and miss alerts, which is very important because during the year, there are certain days where peaks are inevitable, and the system needs to be able to handle all the process data, and and function during those days. So the overcoming challenges and going proactive. So when we're going proactive, we have to take into considerations that we can have many false positives. So we have a risk of too many false alarms. So what could we do? We can have a smarter and graduated response. So adjust enough to just add enough verification, and don't block legitimate customers, because this has to be an added value for the customer and not a hassle. So for example, instead of blocking a transaction, the system asks the client a one-time password. The second challenge is data privacy and compliance. So proactive systems require extensive data analysis, and there needs to be a balance between security and regulation environment. So for example, GDPR and the California Privacy Act. So data, for example, needs to be anonymized, and access is restricted to comply with privacy laws. There is also a need for organizational challenges, not just technology. So we require new skills, metrics, and a prevention-focused mindset. So for example, a frauds team retrained to use analytic tools and focus on prevention KPIs, not just incidents response. There is also integration complexity. We need to connect many systems and data sources, unified fraud prevention architecture, and an essential. So for example, if a bank integrates a transaction login and device data into a single monitoring dashboard, then it can cross-reference the data and see new patterns it didn't see before. So best practice, roll out proactive tools gradually, keep reactive safeguard as a backup, and strong security with seamless customer experience. So for example, start with a pilot in one business line and expand as teams system adapts. So for example, retailers keep manual review for edge cases while automating most fraud checks. Sorry. So one more slide. Thank you for the answers you've provided. So how would you characterize your current fraud model? Most of you said that, so 52.8% of you said that it's partially predictive, which is great news. It means we're going in the right direction, and we're almost there. The goal would be for it to be fully predictive, and so that's great result. That's a great result.
What was interesting, we see that almost 20% of our responders said that it's still under development. So I believe that we still got some homework to do.
Indeed.
Excellent. Let's move on to the next slide. So I'm going to launch a poll now as well. So if you can.
Okay, Joby, so back to you.
Thank you. Can people hear me? Great. Let's get into this next survey. If you can respond to this particular survey, how would you characterize your current fraud operation? I beg your pardon. We want polling question 3, don't we? So let's take a look at that. Which practical area would most improve your day-to-day fraud operations? So if you can take a few moments to think about that, and I guess some of the areas potentially to keep in mind would be actually what would give you the most time back in the day, what currently don't you have time to think about or dedicate enough attention to. So all of these things we'll come back to in a few minutes when we finish this particular segment of the presentation. So let's try to begin to summarize some of the key findings and the takeaways that we've learned so far today. So we know, don't we, fraud is evolving incredibly rapidly. It's driven by AI and advanced social engineering, and scams are no longer a fringe criminal activity. They've become mainstream. So if your controls don't adapt, and I think we've heard a lot about that from Angelika and from Leonard, then your exposure is absolutely inevitable. Your response needs to be highly agile, hybrid operational models, combining automation with human expertise, allowing teams to pivot quickly as new attack vectors emerge, and Leonard just made the point here that there are emerging technologies like quantum computing, privacy-enhancing technologies, agentic AI, all of this is coming down the line, and it's going to be with us very soon. And we know, don't we, that criminals are always 1 or 2 steps ahead of us, so we really need to be taking account of these emerging threat vectors right now. In terms of detection, the response has to be intelligence-led. Machine learning, behavioral biometrics, real-time analytics, all of those different data and intelligence sources are really critical, I think, for spotting anomalies and being able to then act early and act fast. Defense isn't just technology, it's absolutely layered. It's got to combine that automation with human judgment. It's got to embed multi-factor verification. It's got to keep those detection models updated almost in real time. And I think that we're going to hear a lot more from regulators as well, asking how companies are updating their models, what their model validation is, what the governance systems are there. So that's something to keep in mind when considering how you might use AI to combat the threat of AI-generated fraud. And I think it's really worth pointing out here that collaboration is super important. So that hasn't gone away. I think you've got to be working across your departments, across your operations, across your risk colleagues. You've got to be sharing information, whether it's keystroke and voice biometrics, feedback loops, cross-industry intelligence sharing. All of those can help to block fraud in real time, but you can't do any one in isolation. You've got to be working closely together. And finally, and I think it's really worth stressing this, that culture is key. Tone from the top, training, vigilance, customer engagement. It's got to be embedded across your entire organization in terms of raising fraud awareness, and it has to become part of day-to-day business as usual. So let's then go on to our next slide. I'm going to sort of try to bring out some of the themes we've heard, some of the trends in terms of industry leading practices here, the next wave of fighting scams. So we've heard, haven't we, that there's a whole suite of tools and tactics which fraud leaders and teams are using to fight back against fraud and scams. Institutions that ACAMS talk to are moving beyond static controls to behavioral biometrics. They're analysing subtle, unconscious user patterns to create behavioural signatures for each individual customer. And they're hard for fraudsters to replicate. So they can be integrated into traditional fraud rules that your organisation are already running to really help you to create a more complete risk profile. So examples here might include keystroke dynamics, mouse movements that detect unusual typing or scrolling behaviour, and they can then flag compromised accounts almost instantly. Voice biometrics, so comparing voice prints in real time, that can help to identify fraudsters during calls between financial institutions and their account holders. Behavioral and physical biometrics, so layers like gait or device interaction, can combat AI-driven impersonation and deepfake attacks. I think it's actually really encouraging and remarkable that financial institutions potentially have access to that level of data and customer verification. And then finally, facial biometrics, so integrating that into your onboarding processes and controls. These tools can help you to detect mule accounts with a higher degree of accuracy. So not everything is overly pessimistic, but let's think a little bit more about some of the other areas that we've heard a little bit about today. And I think you've got to think beyond purely biometrics. So firms, again, ACAMS are reaching out to, are innovating in customer engagement and investigation strategies. So they are beginning to use micro-learnings and feedback loops, effectively AI-driven natural language processing, which detects scam language gamification can educate customers, and user feedback is becoming a signal for detection models. So an example here might be scammers often claim to be from law enforcement or government. So you are effectively reaching out at the point that the scam is potentially taking place to your customer, your account holder, and alerting them to the fact and just making them conscious that, oh, maybe I ought to rethink this, or give it a moment, come back later on in the day, because actually this has made me think a little bit more seriously about this particular issue. So investigations, I think, are evolving as well, and the approaches to those investigations. And I think collaboration, I made this point earlier, absolutely vital. Collaboration above and beyond banking. So especially, I think, in this day and age with telcos, with social media, with messaging platforms, to help tackle those scams at source. I think I've heard recently that something like 90% of all third-party frauds attempts now are generated through social media, through fake advertisements. So you've got to think really, okay, we can't just be speaking to ourselves. We can't just be talking to those familiar people we know in other financial institutions. There has to be more outreach here. And I think it's also really important to think about how the human in the loop can also help to validate judgments here. So crisis teams are being established to help recover funds in those critical first few hours of people sending money potentially to a scammer. And really, cross-bank intelligence resources are being utilized. So not just the traditional sources of intelligence that we think about in terms of fraud prevention. I'm thinking also things like suspicious activity reporting for anti-money laundering, or network analysis of organized crime groups. Those might be held in different parts of the business, but I think that fraud operations increasingly have to have a contact within those departments, be able to share that information, be able to access that information and use it as part of their decision making. And these approaches really show that fraud prevention isn't just about technology. It remains about that technology being part of the ecosystem, but also partnerships, empowering customers to be part of their own defense. All of that is going to become increasingly vital over time. So what can you do to help try to protect yourself in that regard? Well, look, ACAMS as well as PwC has a whole load of fraud resources. If you're looking to strengthen your fraud fighting toolkit, then do take a look at ACAMS CAF certification that we launched earlier this year, and that helps you to build a deep expertise in detecting and preventing and investigating fraud. Also check out the ACAMS Fraud Hub. That's your one-stop shop really for insights, best practice, thought leadership, and all sorts of free to access resources in terms of evolving fraud threats. And also don't miss the additional guides and toolkits on fraud risk assessment, a taxonomy. All of that is freely available to anybody who goes to the Fraud Hub. And for those who want to take a deeper dive, then the Fraud Hub, it's a great way to stay informed and future ready by accessing things like ACAMS Fraud Watch, which is our monthly fraud webinar, again, where we keep track of evolving trends, regulatory developments, breaking news, and we speak to some really interesting people from government, law enforcement, and the private sector. So I think with that, I will hand back, Una, to you, and thank you all very much for your really interesting content so far. And yeah, back to you, Una.
Thank you, Joby. Really appreciate that. It might be a good moment to check in on the polls, I guess, from the last query. So maybe if we could just jump to the results for that. Okay, super. So I guess in terms of the the question at hand. So which practical area would most improve your day-to-day fraud operations? And here, by far and away, it's better detection tools. And I think that that has come out over and over today in terms of like the proactive technology and actually how to maybe use AI for good. I see that there's also an interesting percentage in here around intelligence sharing. And actually, this leads me to two other questions, which I would like to share with my my panel here. I guess particularly at the beginning, I was focusing on the downside of AI. And Angelica, I think you really talked about using AI for good. Could you maybe share with us maybe who you feel from an industry's perspective, who's ahead of the game in terms of using AI for good? Is it going to be our large financial institutions who have, you know, big teams, big budgets, or rather you think cross-industry, there are other people in the lead here?
Actually, it really depends whether we are discussing about Poland or we are thinking about, you know, wider area. But that is true. When you are talking about big institutions, so that institutions that are having budgets, probably it's much easier to start implementing AI and start to use AI actually as a preventive tool. But I believe that most of the companies, even mid-sized companies here in Poland, are thinking about building resilience based on some AI solutions as well. So I believe that all of our, you know, people who are with us today, had chance to use AI in their everyday work, because it's getting more and more common every day. So I will still stick that it's better with a financial institution or bigger companies, but I believe that it's getting more and more within all companies that we've got. So I believe that everyone is slowly but truly starting using AI as a prevention tool.
And we see that in our day-to-day work. I mean, there's elements of AI in almost everything that we do. And I think that the generations that are coming after us as well, it will be par for the course with them.
Also, Una, we are a good example. We as a company, we as a PwC, we started using AI heavily, obviously in some control way. But we are using AI because our clients are using AI. We need to understand what is available on the market, how we can support, how we can benefit from AI, and what are the risks here as well. So I guess it's a common topic now.
Okay, thank you. That's really, really interesting. And Leonard, I was also reflecting on what you said about around technology, and I was thinking whether or not, you know, we talk about technology in all aspects, and it can be quite intimidating if you're not a technologist. And in your view, how do smaller companies with maybe less budget, less resources, how do you advise them when it comes to tackling fraud using, you know, proactive technology?
So basically, that's a very good question. Basically, I believe in the trickle-down economic effect, where the big companies finance the innovations, the innovation grows over the markets, and then it trickles down to the smaller companies with the best practices, practical knowledge, processes, procedures, and as well as when we use cloud computing and software as a service, we're able to gain access to solutions for much less because they don't need to invest in the infrastructure itself.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting because I think it also merges well with Joby's point around the collaboration and the cross-intelligence sharing.
Correct.
And I assume that what is expensive and big right now won't be in even 2, 3, 4 years' time.
It's with all technology. Let's see it with mobile phones. In the 80s, they were very expensive. Only the richest people in the world could use mobile phones, or the richest countries, and now everybody has one. Because the infrastructure is already there, and the know-how and the technology is mass-produced, and that's why it's available.
Okay. Thank you for that. So I'm just conscious of time. Perhaps we can head back to our slides, and just to wrap everything up, you know, I found this really inspiring in terms of like the different, I suppose, tools available to us, and really understanding which direction to take your organization in will completely depend on, you know, your internal architecture, your infrastructure, what resources you have available to you. And really, we want to keep the discussion going, but by way of key takeaways, because we want to be respectful of time, you know, without a doubt, fraud threats are growing. We've said it a number of times today, and they're getting more complex. I really, what resonated with me earlier as well was the scale point. So there's no team of people that will be able to combat the scale that we're looking at right now. So we have to be, I suppose, smarter in order to kind of be quicker and combat that. also, I think building trust and resilience is really important. I love the idea that I think, Joby, you made about the self-reporting, so identifying the moment and giving the feedback to the organizations who need that. For me, that's a real kind of social cohesiveness, because let's face it, the people who are doing this and driving these fraudulent activities, they're not good for society in any respect. So really being proactive and taking that intelligence-led approach, I think is super. And then also, obviously, with the regulations and the operating models, yes, they are evolving. But with the regulations, I think speaking to your local regulators, understanding exactly what they're aiming for, but also, relying on, I suppose, other people's experiences, trying to understand what they have done that has really managed to combat, reduce, or address fraudulent activities. It's really important to keep that conversation going. And I thought it was interesting earlier as well, Leonard, you talked about how we measure the success in fraud prevention. We talk about KPIs related to time, but actually that's kind of after the fact. You mentioned about having, we're protecting against yesterday's fraud, when absolutely it should be tomorrow's fraud that we're aiming to kind of deactivate. So look, given that we're probably getting close to our conclusions, I just want to say thank you all for your time. Thank you to Joby. Thank you to my panelists as well. I really enjoyed the conversation. We really appreciated the audience participation as well. Thank you so much for participating in all the polls. And of course, you can contact us here. The details are here and will be shared after the webinar. But really, just want to say thank you for the great conversation, some great food for thought, and looking forward to connecting with some of you again in the near future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.